Hi, this is Alex, and if you love music, well, you've come to the right place because we're all about albums. What I consider the 20 greatest, most iconic album covers ever done. These are not in any particular order, so I leave it up to you to decide if you think my picks are worthy or if you have your own picks that you think are even better. Let me know in the comment sections below what you think of my picks. I think the first one is from 1956, and I've talked about it before. The famous first Elvis Presley album. You see a black and white photograph of him showing the intensity and the emotion that rock and roll can bring. And I think teenagers went wild when they saw this album cover. Also, you have a black and white photograph with this pink and green lettering that says Elvis Presley, very large and loud, and this was announcing Elvis Presley is here. Next, we have one of the most iconic album covers of all time, and that is the 1969 album Abbey Road by the Beatles. I don't think I have to say anything about this album. I've discussed this album on prior videos ad nauseum, so if you don't agree with this one, I think there's something wrong with you, because Abbey Road is definitely one of the top 20 most iconic albums out there. I also included the White Album. You went from Sgt. Pepper's, which was so overwhelming and so much information jumping out at you, and then you get this quiet, stark white album by the Beatles, and it is really just eye-catching. You can't not look at an all-white cover, and all they had was embossed the name of the Beatles on the album cover. The original albums also had the number of the album that was printed on it. The first 4 albums went to the Beatles themselves, and the rest of us got the higher numbers, of course. The next iconic album is Sticky Fingers. Came out in 1971. It was designed by Andy Warhol, and it was extremely clever. It has a picture, as you know very well, of a black and white photo of jeans, and no, it is not Mick Jagger. It's actually one of Andy Warhol's models, and the zipper actually was sent out originally partway pulled down. Now, that, although was alluring, wasn't done for that reason. What they found is that the zipper was damaging the records. So if they pull down the zipper just so that the part of the zipper that bulges out is in the center portion of the album, you don't damage the album itself. This album said sexiness as well as a tough and rough image that the Rolling Stones wanted to present to the world, and I think this is very successful in that regard. Another iconic album, also by Andy Warhol, was The Velvet Underground and Nico, that showed a banana. The original albums, you can peel back the skin of the banana to reveal what is underneath. Next, we have Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, 1984. This album presents itself with Bruce as the common man, showing you the back pose with his cap and his jeans. Now, although Bruce Springsteen was a pretty well-known artist at the time, he was more regional, mostly northeastern US, but this album made him an international rock star. Next iconic album is by the Grateful Dead, American Beauty, which came out in 1970. Now, this album cover shows off the new trend that the Grateful Dead was moving into, which was country rock. And this album seems very plain, but if you look at it carefully, it has the background in wood appearance, and it looks like real wood, and that was the country feel. Centrally, we have a bronze ring that is detailed and really looks like it's bronzed and is real to life. And then, of course, they have the introduction of the rose, which is one of the symbols of the Grateful Dead. Next, we have one of the most iconic album covers of all time. Some people would argue the most iconic album cover, and that is Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, coming out in 1973. And this art was designed by the team at Hypnosis. Again, they did the cover art for Pink Floyd. And then we have one of my favorite rock albums of all time. That's The Who's Next, which came out in 1971. It is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. This album shows the band just coming from relieving themselves, saying, "We're back, guys, and we're ready to rock and roll." Some people have interpreted this album cover as the gray stone being the monolith from the film 2001 Space Odyssey. And at that time in the era, the biggest monolithic rock band was Led Zeppelin. And so this is The Who pissing on that. The next album is by Nirvana called Nevermind, coming out in 1991. And this is probably their largest selling album. The album cover of the baby swimming after the dollar bill on a hook is the statement of the band, especially Kurt Cobain, about the commercialism of the record industry, as well as capitalism in general. The next album cover is by Led Zeppelin, their fifth album called Houses of the Holy, and this album cover was also made by Hypnosis in 1973. This album cover started out by Storm Thorgerson doing it, but he created a tennis court which was quite vibrant with a tennis racket on it, and this was him saying Led Zeppelin, their music makes a racket. Well, they didn't like that much, but they stayed with Hypnosis. They just went with a different art designer. The other art designer was Aubrey Powell, and he was trying to capture the sunrise just perfectly as it was coming up in the region of Northern Ireland. What happened was there was accident of tinting on all these photographs, and it caused the children to have a purple hue. And actually they kept this, they liked this to give this more of a mystical feel, surrealism, fantasy-like. And the band really loved this album cover. And again, it is one of the most iconic album covers out there. Another classic album cover is by Roger Dean, which I already mentioned, was Fragile, the first album cover he designed for Yes back in 1974. Next, we have an album cover by Santana from 1970, and this album cover is entitled Abraxas. This album cover is from a painting called The Annunciation by the artist named Matty Clarnwine. This cover is said to symbolize the fusion spirit of the early 1970s and elevated psychedelic art with that of religion. Next, we have Aladdin, Sane, the 1973 David Bowie album. This is very recognizable. This album represents what you're going to find inside, which is glam rock, which is what David Bowie was very well known for early on in his career. As you know about David Bowie, he kept changing his persona, and album after album, he had a different look, which also went along with the music he was representing. And I think this is one of the artists that the album cover and the music go hand in hand. You know what you're going to get once you see the album cover. And who can forget the great Southern rock band, the Allman Brothers, their 1972 album cover, Eat a Peach. The album cover name came from an interview that Duane Allman gave about Vietnam. I'm paraphrasing, but Duane is noted saying that every time he goes back to Georgia, he eats a peach for peace. Next, for all you Genesis fans out there, we have the third album by Peter Gabriel, and this album is noted as the Melting Face album. This cover design was by Storm Thorgerson of Hypnosis. What happened was that Storm told Peter that he had a dream where his face was melting away. And so he took a photograph, and as the Polaroid was developing, he was rubbing it to move the chemicals, and when it dried, it came up with this type of image. Next, we have the rock band Supertramp with their iconic album cover, Breakfast in America, coming out in 1979. It's a parody of the Statue of Liberty, talking about Americans that the food they eat is, that you are what you eat, basically. And we have a waitress holding up an orange juice as the Statue of Liberty torch, and holding up a menu instead of the tablets that the Statue of Liberty holds. Also in the background, if you look carefully, we see the outline of Manhattan, and Manhattan is actually constructed out of things you would find on the breakfast table, including utensils, and they were all just painted white. Next, we have Rumors, the huge #1 album that sold 45 million copies worldwide by Fleetwood Mac in 1977. What's interesting is there's only 2 band members on the cover, Mick Fleetwood and Stevie Nicks. And this is representing that the band was in turmoil. The relationships between the band members were poor. There was divorces going on. And so this is what they had on the album cover, telling you what you're going to find inside the album was a lot about relationships and their falling apart. The next iconic album I put up is Tea for the Tillerman by Cat Stevens. This album I actually put up for a specific reason, and that is it's representing not just Tea for the Tillerman, but many album covers that were actually designed by the artists themselves. Cat Stevens made not only Tea for the Tillerman, but also Bone Jacone album cover, as well as Teaser and the Firecat. Other artists that have done several of their own album covers include Joni Mitchell, as well as Bob Dylan. And finally, last but not least, and maybe this is actually the #1, I've saved it for last, which I've already shown and talked about, is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, done by pop artist Peter Blake. And again, as I said, this album cover broke all the rules, and album cover art after this album is 1967, that came out in the Summer of Love. Things would never, ever be the same. And thank God, because now albums were truly art and held our attention. I would like to give a list of some honorable mentions. I think The Clash's London Calling from 1979 should be on this list. It's the classic punk and post-punk album. In the Court of the Crimson King, Horses by Patti Smith, Born to Run by Springsteen, and Tommy by The Who. Here are last video's unknown albums. The first unknown album is entitled Sandy, and this is by Sandy Denny. This album came out in 1972, and it is on the Island record in the UK, but it is on the A&M record here in the US. Although this is a self-titled album, this is actually her second album. Before her solo career, Sandy Denny was best known as the lead singer for the British folk rock band Fairport Convention. Sandy has a remarkably beautiful folk-type voice that fit perfectly with the band. In 1970, she left Fairport Convention, and with her came guitarist Richard Thompson, who is featured on all of her solo projects. Sandy Denny was also a member of the Strawbs and Fotheringay. Sandy Denny will also be known for her duet with Robert Plant on Led Zeppelin 4, also known as the Zoso album. She sang a duet on the song The Battle of Evermore. Sandy Denny is one of the greatest British folk rock singers. She died at a young age in 1977 due to an accident. The next unknown album is a favorite of mine, entitled Turn of the Cards, and it is by a group known as Renaissance. Now, what's interesting about this album cover, we talked about it on the last video. This is by Hypnosis. So we have talked about Hypnosis, and this is yet another album cover that they did. Renaissance has a unique sound as it fuses both classical as well as folk, rock, and some jazz elements. The original lineup of Renaissance contained 2 members of the Yardbirds. They were tired of playing traditional blues rock, and they wanted to do something more unique. The album Turn of the Cards was released in 1974 on the Sire record label. The album has a lush sound and is orchestrated. The album peaked at number 94 on the Billboard charts and stayed on the charts for 21 weeks. The lead singer appearing on this album is Annie Haslam. She has an operatic type voice and has a 5-octave range. She joined the band in January of 1971 after auditioning when she answered an ad in Melody Maker that a band in Surrey was looking for a new female lead singer. The previous lead singer, Anne Marie Cullum, she retired from the music industry. Renaissance's sound is partially defined by Annie's soaring vocals, and it is considered the fifth instrument of the band. If you want to discover Renaissance and this is a new band to you, I would highly recommend listening either to this album, Turn of the Cards, or their prior release, Ashes Are Burning. Renaissance played 3 sold-out shows at Carnegie Hall, and this was the first British band to do so. Here is this video's new unknown albums, the first unknown album. Okay, great, hope you got that one. The second unknown album. Okay, if you think you know the answers, let me know in the comment sections below. As always, this is Alex with All About Albums. Thanks for listening, have a great day, and remember, keep them spinning.